Good evening, everyone. Scott Kelley is professor of biology at San Diego State. His lab is currently applying computational biology and multiomics technologies to study mammalian microbiomes, the built environment, and the environment and environmental microbiology. As I was thinking about that, it occurred to me that a whole long time ago, when I was at university, there was sort of this thing about genomics maybe being the human genome being a glimmer in somebody's eye. And now we have genomes and cytomics and proteomics and many other omes. And the way I get this, the sense of that I get is that if you combine all these omes, you create a fabric view, sort of like the puzzle pieces in a puzzle of a being, and from that develop fabulous understandings. At least that's the way I think of it. Scott's published many peer-reviewed articles and even a student textbook. But tonight, he has the role as co-leader of San Diego 350's Raise the Alarm team. And we're going to hear Dr. Kelley talk about Sempra's actions to profit from methane for the next 30 years and only devastate our climate worse than it has already. Clearly, we must understand and respond. Scott, over to you.
Thanks for the really kind introduction. Looking at all those slides, I'm in an incredible company. I don't feel like I belong, but I'm going to do my best. I'm going to do my best. And as far as the multi-omics techniques and everything you were talking about, another thing it gives you is a total headache. But I like puzzles. I like headaches, and I try to put as much scientific and literature and understanding and mathematical computational attention I could to this particular project, which is understanding a frack gas and and Sempra and how the whole thing works. And I know a little bit of a lot of things, and so it came in real handy to try to understand their plan, the scope of the plan, the problem with it atmospherically, and really the dangers to local communities and pollution as well. So I'm really pleased that that you invited me. Thanks everyone for coming, and I hope you get something out of it, and I'll be happy to ask questions. I will say that the Raise the Alarm team is a direct action team, and that means we go to the streets and we protest and we find ways to there's many different ways you can participate in the climate movement. But I do feel that if we don't make our voices heard, that the money, it just screams over us. So we got to get to the streets. All right, let me share my screen. And I'll share my slides, that'd even be better. So. For some reason, I'm in the middle of my slide presentation. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to be talking about the world according to Sempra, and I want to say also that I have this website about a lot of this called semprafracksourfuture.org. It's actually a 350 website, so this is the homepage, and you can learn more about what I'm talking about. It needs to be updated, but I'm going to tell you it's still got a lot of great information. So, and before I forget, if you have to leave early, I just want you to know that just remember that Sempra is the parent company of San Diego Gas and Electric. I should hear a lot of boos right now. Boo. Yeah, right. They're the ones who just jacked up your rates. And we are going to be having a rally against their incredibly devastating rate hikes and their proposed rate increases, I think of 18% just in gas for next year. We're going to have that down on April 1st because we're no fools. And it's going to be down in City Plaza. It's going to be a lot of fun at noon. I'll be speaking very briefly about all the things that they've done to deserve our wrath. And people are really upset. So it's going to be, I know it's going to be a good turnout, but you're welcome to come. All right. So I really like to start off this talk and all these talks with with this slide, because let's say you were to take away and, and not think about the climate change aspect. You're not really, it's too abstract for you or something. But even if we took away all of the fossil fuel, carbon emissions that are driving global warming, and we just focused, and a lot of environmentalist movement doesn't focus on this, and we just asked, what does fossil fuel extraction do to planet Earth, and what does it do to the people who live there? It really has created some massive hellscapes on this planet. So I'm just going to go through a few of them. One of them is the Alberta tar sands, which some of you are familiar with. That's where tar sand oil comes from. And it is a total hellscape that is so great, you can see it from space. So it is a gigantic area. In this tar sands, there are bulldozers the size of houses, two-story houses. They go back and forth every day, ripping up the boreal forest, all the plants, all the animals, destroying the waterways to get out this tar sands oil. Every day they're ripping up this area. One company, just to give you a couple examples of what's going on here, one company, one mine of the dozen mines that are up there produces 250,000 gallons of toxic wastewater every single day. The wastewater is so toxic that there's these giant ponds up there of this toxic wastewater because they have to use high pressure water to get the sands out. There's a pond that they have to have a little robot bird cannon floating on it that fires off a cannon blast every 30 minutes to scare away the birds, because if any birds land on this thing, and there are flocks of birds that come by here, if any of them land in this pond, they instantly die. And the rates of cancer are astronomical in these areas. The water pollution, this is First Nations land, and it has been completely destroyed. Over on the right, that's the top left. To the top right, you've got a coal mine. This is in West Virginia. It's a strip mining coal plant. Just imagine if this was your house. You strip the whole mountain down, you leave all of the refuse, and it drains off into people's waters, and this is your backyard. That's not very nice. On the bottom right is probably one of the most horrific ones that I know of. This is the Niger Delta. This place was a paradise. It doesn't look like a paradise anymore. This is the Niger Delta is one of the most polluted, oil polluted regions in the world, where there's fires going on all the time in the middle of the rainforest. Everyone's water is polluted, and the average life expectancy is 40 years of age. 40 years of age. Okay, and then the bottom left, I'm just going to look at fracking. So this is a fracking landscape, right? This is a landscape in the Permian Basin, and we're seeing an overhead shot here, but all of these little dots, they're not very little, they're all fracking well pads. So this entire landscape has been ripped up, all the plants, all the animals, the water's been polluted, and it's been just utterly destroyed. Right, so the natural destruction of the fossil fuel industry
is on this broadcast.
Yeah, I'm hearing somebody. Is someone saying something? Okay. Even if you just got rid of all the gases, which these all produce lots of greenhouse gases, it would still be devastating. And I wouldn't want to live anywhere near any of these things, but people do. So of course, we also have the issue of what is going on in the climate. So let's take that and let's add the climate. And it's getting really dire. I think I don't really have to tell everyone, but I go through this anyway, because it just sets the stage of where we're currently at, which isn't good, and how we have to stop. So a couple years back, there was a heat wave up in Canada and Northwest that killed 500 people. It actually killed over 1,000 people because it was just too hot. At that same heat dome, killed about 1 billion marine animals as they cooked to death on the shore. There's been a Wega drought in the West, which is the worst in 1,200 years. It's gotten a little better recently with the massive rains and snows that we've had, but 1,200 years is a long time. Chile had a record-breaking drought that makes climate change extremely easy to see. There's extreme drought in California. Obviously, there's floods in Europe. The 2021 floods washed away whole towns. I mean, I've never heard of this. I'm 50 years old. I've never heard of any of these kind of things happening in my lifetime. And they're happening at incredible frequency. In China, there was a flood that was so great, they think it was bigger than ever happened in the 5,000 years of their civilization, right? And then, of course, in Pakistan, in India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, there were massive floodings. Pakistan was covered, a third of the country was covered with water. Can you imagine a third of California, which is around the same size, covered with water for months on end? So we're in a really bad place right now. And we need, and fossil fuels are driving this. We know this, everyone admits it. The fossil fuel companies admit it as well. So what we have to do now, just keep in mind as the basis of this talk is that 50% of the carbon polluted in the atmosphere has been disgorged in the last 30 years. So we're increasing it at a massive rate. And the last 30 years have been extremely important. 2022, there was a record amount of greenhouse gas emissions, and methane in particular is going up very fast. We talk a lot about methane. So the background is, and I think all of you know this, we must immediately start reducing or eliminating greenhouse gases to prevent disaster, because there's already a lot of greenhouse gases, and they're a blanket around the earth. They're not going away, and they're going to cook the planet for another 100 years in terms of CO2, and 30 years or 20 or 30 years for the methane, right? And so we have to stop it, yet we're adding more. So what is Sempra doing about this? Well, I want to tell you first who Sempra is. Sempra is the title, but Sempra is a fossil fuel infrastructure company, right? They're a parent company located in Texas, although they do have a headquarters in San Diego. And they are a parent company of a bunch of other companies, including our own SDG&E, including SoCalGas, and including things that I'll talk about, which is the liquefied natural gas that they've built. So what Sempra really is, though, is a natural or fracked methane gas holding company. That is where they've turned their business in a major way. And they use the profits from their utilities, SDG&E and SoCalGas, mostly SDG&E, which provides something like 40% of their profits. They turn that into creating their frack gas empire. Okay. So Sempra's vision in the face of this disaster, in the face of needing to lower fossil fuels, is to expand it. That's what they want to do. They want to expand natural gas, which is, I'll give you a hint, not very natural. It's in the ground, but it takes a lot to get it out, let me tell you. They want to build infrastructure to sell it overseas to establish a multi-decade dependence on fossil fuels. So we have to stop now, and we have to get rid of it. But they want to keep us going for another 30 years on this. So their plan, and they've already implemented a lot of this, is to use our money for overpaying for our rates to fund the infrastructure, pipelines and terminals, so they can transport the gas. And let me be clear, they don't frack the gas, they sell it. So but without having all of these pipelines that they're building on our dime, they wouldn't be able to frack all that gas, and we'd have to do something else. And 80%, of course, or more of it is the fracked methane gas. Why is fracked gas? I mean, we have to get off it. Obviously, it burns it, it makes CO2, so that's a real problem. You know, it's cleaner than coal, but actually when you take into account its methane or its global warming potential, that is really a dubious proposition. But why is it just generally bad? So if you live near the fracking wells, and here's a couple of one up here, you got to see this stuff all the time. There's constant flaring going on. There's gas leaking. I'll talk about it later, but there's water pollution and habitat loss. There's lots of air pollution. There are the man camps that spring up, and I'm familiar with some of this because in upstate New York, there's some of this going on as well, but it's really particularly bad in the Dakotas because it's been associated with just all men who go there to work. And there's association with rape, murder, prostitution, drugs, the whole thing at these things. There's explosions and leaks. And let's keep in mind, the gas leak, methane, is 86 times more potent, 86 times more potent in greenhouse gas than CO2 over 20 years. And then over maybe 100 years is 30 times more potent. So it's a really bad gas to be leaking. So the myth is that it's a clean transition fuel, but in the short term, it's actually worse than coal for the global climate. All right, so what is, we got Sempra is a natural gas company, as I said, SDG&E and SoCal Gas, and Sempra LNG, which is what I'm going to focus on, their liquefied natural gas industry. So in 2019, to show you where they were headed, in 2019, they sold all their renewable energy products and they increased their investment in natural gas. So SDG&E has some wind farms, great. But Sempra told you what they wanted to do by selling all of these. And this is in their prospectus. In the meantime, they've actually bought a wind farm back. And I get asked that about things, but it's like, that's just a bit of greenwashing because they were so embarrassed that they got caught out selling all of their renewable energy products. Their focus has been liquefied natural gas terminals, where they liquefied the gas, the fracked methane, and then they sell it abroad. And the growth of fracked gas is dependent on this business. So if they want to keep it growing, US is not enough of a market. They've got to export it elsewhere. And they're building extra terminals in Texas, and they're building it in Baja. But then they tell us they don't have any gas. Kind of amazing, actually. So what is LNG? Why do frackers love it? Well, LNG is the frontier of fossil fuel expansion, right? It's like how they're going to get it everywhere across the ocean. And why it's so great is because you can chill down methane. I think it's minus 80. I can't remember the temperature, but you can chill it down and become 600 times denser in liquid form. So for the same volume that you would have liquid, you can get 600 or gas, you can get 600 times more of it in its liquid form, as long as you keep it super cold. For the overproduction of natural gas, LNG is the quote unquote solution. So here's the thing, even if we reduce it here, they're going to export it elsewhere. Right? And now we're the largest exporter of fracked methane in the world, and it started a boom around the world, which is really quite terrifying, actually. All right, so how does it work? Well, you get the natural gas pipelines that come in, and then there's the liquefaction of the natural gas. It's compressed at minus 265 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's colder than I said, apologies. But it gets really small, and then it's put into storage, and then it's put it on these tankers, and you can see these little barrels. That's liquefied natural gas. It's actually really dangerous stuff if it gets out, really bad. They export it, and then on the other side, they bring it into a terminal, they vaporize it just by heating it up, and they pump it into natural gas pipelines, and it goes into factories and homes. So it's the export and import. And it all sounds nice and clean. The only problem is that it leaks everywhere. And there's almost virtually no regulation of this as far as I can tell. So here's what you have. What are the kind of things that come out? Well, there's the fracking, there's the scrubbers, there's the pipelines, there's the terminals, and then there's the tankers. So all along this process, there's leakage. And they estimate it's anywhere from 2 to 5%, depending on, and those are the regular leaks. So what leaks? Methane leaks in the fracking, methane leaks at the scrubbers, methane leaks in the pipelines, methane leaks at the terminals, methane leaks at the tankers. It leaks all around the ocean, and then it comes in the other side. Then it leaks at the terminals when you vaporize it. Then it leaks in the pipelines. Then it leaks in the scrubbers, and then it leaks in people's homes and in their gas stoves all the time as well. So big problem. All right, and this leakage is not inconsequential. Not inconsequential. It's a massive climate problem. So people have looked at the amount and estimated the amount of leaks that are happening in the Permian Basin, Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, that area, Utah. That's where a lot of our gas comes from. All right. And the astonishing amount of greenhouse gas equivalents that are leaked, just leaked, not about the burning, not about all the gas that gets burned or shipped elsewhere, that are just leaked in the Permian Basin, is the equivalent of taking 50 train cars of coal every day, every single day, out into the desert, dumping it in a giant pile 200 feet high and lighting it on fire. That is how much greenhouse gases are leaked just from the Permian Basin by 2030, right? And that doesn't count all the other places it leaks, just from there. And then you have things that are really leaking. By the way, this Permian climate bomb, chapter 2, is extremely good. It's very well documented. One of the easiest resources for just learning about fracking that I've ever seen. So here we have a couple of pictures on the right of just, now you can't see methane. It's a colorless, odorless, invisible gas. But if you have the right camera, infrared camera, you can see it just fine. And so here's a couple of examples where people were driving around or flying around Texas, and they just found some of these absolutely uncontrolled, out of control leaks happening, which no one can see. And if this was actually smoke, people would be upset. But they can't see it, and it's just constantly leaking greenhouse gases, and no one gets anything from this. Nobody gets to burn it for gas, for fuel. You don't get to heat your house with this. You don't get to go camping with it. It just goes right into the atmosphere and drives global warming. Why don't they fix it? Because it costs a little money. Here's an example of, there's some good news about this. The good news is that if you dealt with this problem, you could stop a lot of greenhouse gas emissions very easily. And I'll show you an example. This is from NASA very recently, who took pictures of it from space. And you can see the drilling wells around here. So here's a bunch of drilling platforms and wells. I don't know how many of them use, but you can see one of them is what's called a super emitter. This is a super emitter, which is just going straight into the atmosphere uncontrolled, right? No burning or anything. It's a 2-mile-long plume near Carlsbad, Mexico, of somebody who just has a bad pipe and they're not bothering to fix it. And so it is just leaking massive amounts of methane every single day, on and on and on and on, for no purpose other than they can't be bothered to fix it. It's crazy. And this is a big problem because methane on the right is one of the fastest growing greenhouse gases out there. Big problem. Good news is, if we plug this leak, we could stop a lot of emissions, and they're easy to find. We can talk about that if you like, but no one's doing anything about it because the lobbyists are like, no, you don't have to fix these methane leaks. That costs too much money. All right, so how do we know Sempra's plan? Sempra told us. That's right. They have it in their prospectus. They have it in their investor relations, and we can just read about it. It's great. So here is an example of the different sites. This is obviously Mexico, and then we have Texas and the coast of Mexico here around San Diego. Ooh, they've got even San Diego Gas and Electric right there. Isn't that cute? They show you that their plan was to invest $32 billion, large 5-year capital plan, on their smart energy infrastructure supporting cleaner fuels. Like this. What is cleaner fuels TM? I don't know what that means. That's our money. That's our money that they take from San Diego, or that they took at least a third. In 1 year, they took 100% of their profits, Sempra's profits, came from San Diego Gas and Electric. And they've invested it in these terminals instead of anything else they could be doing. This is really why they're doing. They're salivating, and I'm using this term, but I'm thinking in my head what they're like, but they're salivating about how much gas they estimate that there is in the Permian Basin. They estimate there's 2.4 quadrillion cubic feet of natural gas. We cannot burn all that and have a livable planet. That is crazy. And that's just one resource in the world. There's other sources like the ones up in the Marcellus Shale that have a lot of gas as well, and they're leaking like crazy. This is not a good idea. But as an investor goes, you're like, hey, look how much gas there is. All right, so just to a reminder is that Sempra also owns SoCal Gas. And as you might recall, there was a huge gas blowout that leaked 100,000 tons of natural gas, quote unquote, fracked gas in Aliso Canyon. And it was so bad that they actually got sued for $1.8 billion, and the families won, right? But it wasn't bad enough because they convinced the ratepayers not to shut it down. So they leaked almost 100,000 tons of methane over 5 months, sickened the communities. And then the Senate Appropriations Bill, California said, no, that's okay. You can keep Aliso Canyon. All of that gas, the reason it leaked was because there was one pipe that they refused to fix for like 60 years. All you need to do is put another casing about it, and they were too cheap to do it. And they released 100,000 tons of methane, and then they say we don't have any gas. All right. Oh, by the way, I'm just going to point out, Sempra could be green, by the way. Sempra, actually, a vice president named Lee back in 2017 actually was quoted in the press saying, you know, I didn't think that we could do all renewable energy. It was just too hard, but I did the math and we have the computer technology and we can resolve this. We could do 100% renewable electricity right now if we wanted to. They kicked him out, but they founded a company that actually is doing that all over the world. They're creating microgrids all over the world, including some here in San Diego, which are kind of interesting. And they can run whole towns with their really interesting technology. So they know that they could do this. They could invest in this. They could make this happen, but they're not. All right. So I'm just going to stop here, see if people have any questions, because and how's my timing going?
You're fine, Scott. You got about, you used maybe 25 minutes or so.
Oh, perfect. All right. Great, because I really do like to come to this. I'm going to take just a short break to turn my light on here, and because I'm getting in the darkness, and I'll be right back.
You know, Scott, as you're taking that break, I'd just like to insert a couple of comments, if I might.
Sure.
Nature Climate Change magazine just published an article that says meat, dairy, and rice production will bust the 1.5-degree climate target because of methane emissions, and that in fact, just those food sources will increase the temperature by one degree C all by itself, if, you know, by the end of the century, if we don't do anything else. So we're already at like 1.2. So this would add another 1 degree. And 75% of food-related heating was driven by foods that are high sources of methane. A couple more facts that I thought were quite stunning. Methane has accounted for roughly 30% of global warming since pre-industrial times already. And methane emissions account for a whopping 73% of projected warming by mid-century. A few small details. And methane already has resulted in somewhere around 1 million deaths of humans from the impacts of health. You know, you're going to talk about health here, but we're talking about 1 million people already.
I didn't know that. That's depressing. Yeah, and you know, it's harder to control. I'll say it's harder to control some of these sources, like people eating food, you know, like rice and everything. I mean, people need food, but this unmitigated gas releases are very controllable. And so if we had to start somewhere, I'd start here, but of course we have to deal with all of it. And that's really important. But thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so I'm going to continue here on the public health consequences. This is something that I was asked to give a talk on this recently, and I thought I knew a lot about the public health consequences. But when I looked into it, I was pretty shocked, actually, how bad it is. So here we have, how would you like to live next to this? So you're looking out here and you're thinking, hey, just right across the road, they're flaring methane all the time. So if they didn't flare it, it would just be an unreleased mess. It would just go right in the atmosphere. By flaring it, you're turning it into CO2 and other gases. But the burning of it, the constant unending burning of these methane flares has some serious health consequences. I would not want to live near this, but there are a lot of people, they have to. All right, so what is it like to live near methane fracking? What are the dangers of all this? Well, the air pollution is clearly one of the ones that is the worst. If you have any kind of health issues, or you're a young person, or maybe a pregnant person, or just anything, or older, it's a real problem. So the chemicals that come out of the wells include obviously methane, but also nitrogen oxides, NO and NO2, and volatile organic compounds, hydrogen sulfide, benzene, toluene, mixed xylenes, and formaldehyde. I don't think I have to tell you that these aren't good for you. These are really cancer causing and nasty. And the 2002 situation is we have air monitors and methane monitors in cities, but we don't have them out in the countryside. So the people don't have much monitoring going on in these areas about what their health situation is like. This was a shocking one I just came across. I lived in Colorado, and when I lived in Colorado, fracking hadn't really taken off. They talked about it, but it hadn't taken off there. Well, in the time since I left, they have fracking has exploded all over the eastern part of the state. All over the eastern part of the state, there's fracking wells everywhere. And one of the things you see is the nitrogen oxides emissions from hydraulic fracturing or fracking actually turn out to be, they were bad already, but they turn out to be double the state's original estimates. So fracking accounts for more ozone causing emissions than all cars and trucks along the Front Range. There's a lot of cars and trucks along the Front Range. 45% of nitrogen oxide emissions and 41% of volatile organic compound emissions are that. So let's take a look at my graph here. Here we have the vehicle emissions, percentage or tons of nitrogen oxides per day. And here's the fracking emissions. So they were doing the math wrong. Now that they have it right, it's twice as bad as they thought it was. And if you live there, it's horrifying. What is it like and what are the issues linked there? Well, they've been linked to a whole lot of premature deaths, including premature deaths among senior citizens. You're much more likely to die early if you're 65 or older. They've been linked to premature births, extreme preteen births, low birth weight infants, and also pregnancy complications. Living near fracking has led to higher infant mortality, greater number of hospitalization, migraines, and importantly, upper respiratory tract infections, which is really not great when you have a COVID epidemic. Children have twice the rate of lymphoblastic leukemia when they're near a fracking wells. So this was a study done by the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. And there's some more articles that you can read about it there. These are the areas of real concern. All the red areas are right next to all the fracking, but even the yellow areas is more dangerous. This is a significant portion of the United States. What kind of oxide? Nitrogen oxides, VOCs, and ozone are a group of related gases. So nitrogen oxides are NO and NO2. VOCs are cancer-causing and also help to generate ozone. It's very interesting. So outside, you get them from oil and gas operations, and inside, you get them from gas stoves. So the health effects, according to the American Lung Association of ozone, are airway inflammation, coughing and wheezing, decreased lung function, and increased likelihood of emergency visit. Who pays for this? Not big gas. 2016 study of 350,000 cancer patients showed that if they lived near fracking, they had lower lifespans. And who's going to pay for that? Of course, not the big oil and gas. I just put this up here because today I saw this, that Norfolk Southern CEOs, they're not going to pay for your health insurance. If they had to pay for your healthcare costs for all these people, there would be no fracking. There would be no fracking. But you get to pay for it, or the people who live there get to pay for it. And they don't get any health insurance bonuses or anything for that. So I just want to show you out the reason why nitrogen and plus ozone is really nasty. I actually did a little bit of research on it, and I'm a bit of a biochemist. I mean, I've done some biochemistry training, so I kind of understand what's going on. And essentially, what happens is that you have protein. These are this thing in the bottom left is actually a couple of amino acids linked together. And what happens is that when you combine nitrogen oxides, nitrogen dioxide, and ozone, you get more peptide cleavage, more protein cleavage in the lungs than either of them alone. So there's a synergistic effect between environmental oxygen, NO2, and ozone. And you can see since you are made of protein, we're made of proteins. If you breathe this stuff in together, it's going to really start to rip up your alveoli in your lungs because all those proteins are going to get damaged. Everything in there is going to get damaged. So really not fun. And then at the end of the line, near the terminals, well, they don't put them just anywhere, do they? They put them where they think the people won't fight back. So for instance, in Port Arthur, Texas, and I met somebody there who is fighting back. There's one plant, this is near the terminals for the shipping, emits 111,000 tons of sulfur dioxide every year in this community. This community has 2 times the state average of cancer, heart, lung, and kidney disease. It's 98% Black and 2/3 below the poverty line, right? That's the situation. And Sempra is going to build it bigger, make some more pollution. Here's another one, Cheniere's, I don't know how to say it, Cheniere's massive LNG plant exceeded the permit levels for soot, carbon monoxide, and VOCs and volatile organic compounds hundreds of times since 2018. Hundreds of times. What happens? Every time they violate it, Texas just says, raise the limit. Like, they don't live there. The people who vote on that don't live in this neighborhood, I'll tell you that. And residents like huge flares to burn up gas, air quality is getting worse and worse. And the more we expand it on our dime, the more they're going to have these emissions, more emissions they're going to make. But not in the CEO's backyard, no siree. The Exxon CEO, they were going to put a fracking infrastructure next to his ranch. He's like, nope, no, you're not. I don't want it. Good old Rex. The other thing I found out that I just didn't want to know is that fracking fluids are nasty too. So to do fracking, you have to have high temperature water that you pump down into the ground to break up fracture the rocks, and that releases the methane gas, which then comes out to the surface and they try to capture it. They don't do a very good job of it. But what I found out was that a lot of the chemicals, they put a lot of nasty chemicals into the ground when they do this. And one of those chemicals is a forever chemical. Yes, they're putting lots of forever chemicals into the groundwater. Forever chemicals are things that were made per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. They're crazy chemicals, but basically there are a whole bunch of fluorines, which are the strongest bonds you can have in chemistry, organic chemistry. These carbon fluorine bonds make these compounds that, and you might know this better as Teflon. So Teflons are made of these, and one nice thing about Teflons is they make things slick. So they've made a lot of Teflon foams for firefighting, but they also dump it into the wells as a lubricant so they can get more gas out. So unfortunately, not only is it hard to degrade, there's only one microbe that we know of on the planet that actually degrades this compound, and they just found it recently. So it's pretty much doesn't degrade in nature. It accumulates in water, soils, and people and animals. And what does it cause? Well, the Center for Disease Control, the National Academy of Sciences did a study, which you can read about PFAS exposure, or forever chemical exposure, testing in clinical, and they found it linked to all of these different conditions: kidney cancer, liver cancer, cholesterol, I can't even say it, thyroid disease, testicular cancer, lower birth rates, and delayed mammary gland formation, plus some of these other things. All of these things are caused by it, which is accumulating in our bodies, and especially accumulating in these liver. And they actually asked the CDC to update its clinical guidance because the CDC is far behind. And I don't want to ask why, but I'm pretty sure I know. And really, the Physicians for Social Responsibility did a study on this that showed that 130 companies at least were poisoning, well, I'm going to say poisoning, but were using this substance in over 1,200 wells in at least 6 states. In one fracking site in Glasgow County, Texas, drilling operators injected 324 pounds of PFAS into one well. Turns out that just 1 cup of this stuff could contaminate 8 billion gallons of water. So, wow. That's crazy how much they're contaminating it. And then the accumulation goes like this, right? So you get it, the stuff is in the sediment, it gets in the plankton, it bioaccumulates in the fish, and then say a gull eats it. And all the way up the food chain, it gets more and more of it. So it accumulates in our bodies. Eating just one freshwater fish these days, this is how bad, and the contamination isn't just from fracking, obviously. This is what our drinking water is already like. One freshwater fish can have 48 parts per trillion of PFOSs, right? And a new study found that the median PFAS level in freshwater fish was 278 times higher than commercially sold fish in the last 3 years. So it is everywhere in our environment, and they're going to put some more in. The other thing I noted is that they leave behind all this polluted water, and it doesn't just have PFAS. It actually, that stuff goes into the ground, but what they pull out also has a lot of toxic things and a lot of radioactivity. So here, for instance, what they'll say is, hey, just let us come and frack. You get some money, no problem, and just sign on the dotted line. So in this particular story in the Navajo Nation, they gave members like this pittance for access to the land. Then they had fires, they created fires, and then they had spills. And in one instance, 59,000 gallons of toxic frack water just leaked out in their property. So when they're done with this, they just leave all that spill behind. In 2015, a broken North Dakota pipeline carrying this water produced 3 million gallons of contaminants that dumped in a nearby creek. The other thing is they're saying, well, fracking is a problem because of water. And so you have to use a lot of water to do fracking. And then you're pulling up a lot of water back out of the ground. And then it's like, well, let's, we're running out of water. Let's recycle it. That sounds good. Recycling is good. Everyone's into recycling. The problem is that you've got to clean it up. So you take out the water, and what you're taking out from the ground has radium in it. Well, you don't want to just dump radium on your crops. You have to do something with it. So what they've been doing is that they've been concentrating their radioactivity, and then they got to put that concentrated radioactivity, take it out of the water, and they got to put it somewhere. Well, in Kentucky, they decided that they just had to dump it. And they put 2,000 tons of this radioactive sludge, which is going to be radioactive for at least 4,000 years. And they put it right next to a school. Right, so here's the radioactive sludge, and they said there's a barrier here. We'll just throw some dirt on it. Throw some dirt on it. And the community had no idea. Well, I can tell you, I'd be pretty upset if I found out that my middle school and high school was downstream of a radioactive waste pit. Not cool. And of course, there's noise pollution. If you're ever near these things, they're constant noise drives people nuts. And they can have all sorts of issues associated with this, like auditory health issues, annoyance, sleep disturbance, cardiovascular disease because of the stress. And they produce noises at levels that are just beyond what we should be experiencing. So that's another big issue. Okay, so unfortunately, I could go on, but I'm not going to. Here's some resources that you can read more about the Permian climate bomb. That's a really great resource. We'll let you have the slides. There's a nice video on methane leaks. I talked a little bit about it, but there's some real world experts on this slide. I talk about the public health dangers, which I just talked to you about, so you don't have to watch that part. But the other three speakers really talk about things like where methane leaks are. They talk about satellite images and infrared cameras and how we could really do about it, what we could do about it. It's really quite a great slideshow. And then, of course, there's Sempra Fracks Our Future website, which has a lot of basic information about Sempra. And then I'm just going to leave you with this slide, which is, again, to talk about the fire SDG. It was a rain delay. We're going to have it before, but the new date is on April 1st, because we are no fools, and it's going to have some music. It's going to have some great speakers, but we're rallying against the rising rates because SDG&E is really taking us to the cleaners. So, and I just put a bunch of articles that I pulled out that, they're killing rooftop solar. Why are they doing that? Well, my guess is it's competing with their core business, which is selling us fracked gas. There's also a fracking, the fracking boom is really a bad idea. 1 in 4 San Diegans can't pay the utilities. The former CPUC head is now lobbyist for Sempra. Sempra is expanding frack gas in Mexico. And right recently, there's some talk about the SoCal gas hikes. The recent hikes we had, there could be some real interesting and not so savory aspects of why we paid 114% of the normal price for gas this last year, where everyone else is paying less than 30% higher rates. So all those things are good reasons get down there and come and rally. All right, so that's my talk, and I hope you got something out of it.
Fantastic,
Happy
Scott. That was stimulating and frightening at the same time. Before we start with the questions, I'd just like to clarify what I said earlier when we had the break. The statement is that methane is the primary contributor to the formation of ground level ozone, which is what you said, that causes more than 1 million premature deaths every year, not cumulative, more than 1 million per year. And as an aside, San Diego has the 6th worst ozone air quality of all cities in the US. So that's a special feature that Sempra helps us with, so to speak. Another resource that that's entertaining, at least to add to what you were saying, was a movie called Gasland by Josh Fox from 2010. And in the movie, there's some unforgettable scenes where people turn water on in their faucet in the kitchen, and Josh puts a match to it and the water lights a fire. I mean, it's just absolutely, disturbing. And another article, a set of articles recently, adding to what you were saying about health, nearly everyone in the world has PFAS in their bodies now. It's of some research released in the last week or two. So just exclamation points to what you were saying. Devin, would you like to start with the first question?
Sure. This question comes from Albie. And so this is sort of a depressing question, but where is the EPA in all of this?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. The EPA actually was going to regulate greenhouse gases. They had the authority to do so. I don't know if they were actually going to enforce it, but my understanding is, and that was a real threat, because to the bottom line, the profit of the frackers, because the gas leakage is the biggest problem. So they write. So for instance, if you read that Permian climate bomb, there is one regulator in Texas for every something like 1,500 wells. They are not monitoring right now. Nobody is really monitoring this. But if the EPA comes in and says, well, you've got to deal with this, they're going to have to fix all of these leaks, and it's going to cost them money, and it's very upsetting. So what the Supreme Court said, I believe recently, is that they don't even have that authority anymore. And I think the major reason that they overturned that authority was because the oil and gas industry, especially the fracking industry, knew that it was going to hurt their bottom line, and they didn't want that. So the EPA is, I think the EPA is pretty corrupt already. I mean, I'm going to use that word, but I think we can start using it now, because there's been some incredible, the EPA has been caught out absolutely off camera, like with hot mics, talking about how they have to call their business people to ask if they really want this regulation or not. It happens all the time. So there are already real problems with revolving door between industry and our government, but I think that they just got gutted. The whole ability of the EPA to regulate greenhouse gases just got pretty gutted by the Supreme Court.
Well, it can add to that. The last administration tried to move the EPA and lost 1,600 or so, something like that, of their key scientists. So it definitely, chopped them off at the knees in terms of their scientific depth and ability to act.
Yeah, I know the EPA has wonderful scientists. I'm not disparaging them at all. I know people who work there. They're incredible scientists, but like, I think I'm a good scientist too, but you got to listen.
Well, and you also have to have the bodies there doing the work. If you lose 1,600 key people, that's a big deal.
Exactly, that too.
Yeah. So maybe you would like to add a little more, Scott, to the question of the connection between all of this Sempra gas and the recent rate hikes and so forth? Do you see, there must be a linkage.
Absolutely. So one of the things you can say from my presentation, and you don't have to, you could probably say this without doing any research, is there's plenty of gas. I mean, they say there's 2.4 quadrillion cubic feet of gas out there. Why do our rates go up if there's all this gas? Well, the rates are, well, where are they bringing that gas? They have all the pipelines going to their LNG terminal facilities, and they're going to sell it to Europe and Asia at something like 4 times the price. So they're salivating about the gas going other places, and they are not incentivized to send it to us, even if we wanted it, which I'm not sure we should have it. But you can see that I think at one point they let a pipe actually exploded in 2021. And it was one of the few pipes that actually went to California. Well, they've got lots of pipes going to Texas. They want to have a pipe that goes past us to Baja. So, and then they say there's no gas. It's incredible. It's just insane. Then they have Aliso Canyon where they let 100,000 tons of methane leak into the atmosphere because they couldn't fix a pipe. And you can look it up. It's not very hard. And then they say there's no gas. It's no gas because you guys let it go into the atmosphere. So the whole thing is really connected, and their LNG, like the export of oil and gas, is really a disaster for the planet because it's allowing us, we're going to pay for it. We already bought the whole thing. They made us pay for it for 10 years. And now they're selling it elsewhere and keeping all the profits. We don't even get a dime about it, but we do get some global warming. So that's the connection I see. Because San Diego Gas and Electric, we paid for that. And we're continuing to pay for that. And we're going to continue to pay for their, like they say, oh, well, we have different sources of money. But in fact, we're actually paying to corrupt our own legislatures. So the whole thing is like, it's all connected. It's all one thing because we're forced to, because they're an energy monopoly. We have no choice. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Devin?
Well, this is just off of that. So if it is a monopoly, which it clearly is, what is it we can do? I mean, what are our options? How do you fight a monopoly like that, especially when it has so many government ties, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think there's several ways you could fight it, but there is actually room in the agreement for us to get rid of them. And the first thing we can do is put pressure on our city council and our mayor, especially in San Diego, who signed this 20-year agreement, to say, we don't like this agreement anymore. We don't want to be locked into this. They're going to force our rates to go up another 45%. So the first thing we can do is tell all our elected representatives who's supposed to work for us, we're their boss, but they think those guys are their boss. We got to remind them that we're the boss. Get down there to the rally, call them and tell them we want a public hearing, tell them we want to get off their SDG&E and have go to public power. I mean, I could tell you, nothing's perfect out there, but every municipal out there is cheaper than what we've got. And we'll have more democratic control of what actually happens in their business. Because right now they can do whatever they want and they can send mega profits. I think the CEO of Sempra made $25 million in 1 year, $25 million. And then nobody here can get any heat. And then they say, you know what? I think 3 people made $100 million in 1 year, 3 executives. And then they say, oh, well, we'll give you $1 million. Like that's 1% of 3 people's take-home pay. 1%. It's like we're just plebes. So we can remind them that we're the boss. I think that's one of the things we do. Come down to that and tell them. And then, of course, by putting pressure on our elected officials, maybe they'll do something about it. Maybe they'll go to the CPUC and say, stop this. Maybe they'll say, stop doing, turn this around and give us back our solar power, right? Because they got rid of solar power, right? They have this new agreement. We want some competition. We want to do the right thing. All of that are things that we can do now.
Sempra has the pleasure of earning the highest rate per kilowatt hour of any energy provider in the country. San Diego is only paying 47.5 cents per kilowatt hour. If you go and look at Mark Jacobson's recent work, he talks about the possibility of building a solar and wind infrastructure that has the root cost of about 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So, you know, double it, triple it in terms of just the cost of infrastructure, add a profit margin, and you're still far, far from 47.5 cents, you know, a kilowatt hour. Sempra recently asked, or is in the process of asking, for a rate increase from 2022 to 2025 of only 24%. They're only asking for a 24% rate increase. There are 1.5 million electricity customers in the county, and they want 5.3% there, and 909,000 gas customers, and they only want a 17.5% increase on what you've been talking about. That's their request to the CPUC, on top of being already the highest rate provider. Now, the good news, sort of, is when City of San Diego voted to give them a 10-year extension on their monopoly a year plus ago, there's a review cycle every 2 years where the city could change their mind and back off from that. Is there any hope, do you think, of us getting the city to change its mind and move toward public power? I mean, can we really apply enough pressure to maybe cause that to happen?
Absolutely. I mean, you get enough people angry enough and they're storming down there and demanding that they do things. That's what elected officials listen to. Ultimately, we're the voters. They depend on us. If they see an overwhelming number of people who are just pissed off and ready to, I mean, there's people who are literally freezing in this environment. And the CPUC, I wasn't at the meeting, but I heard it was incredible. The stories that people had, they were really upset and really furious, and they get to decide who's elected in this. And if they get really angry, they can toss these people out. They can force them to do the right thing. They can have these meetings, which are really simple, and several of them should have already had them already. They shouldn't have. Why are they waiting for us? They should be investigating right now. Not one city council member has even raised this as an issue. How is this possible? Well, if we all start yelling at them and we say, get on the phone and say, why aren't you raising? Where's the public hearing? Why are my rates so high? Constantly, every day, they're going to listen. This is how democracy works. And we can either use it or we can just let them, I feel like a punching bag. I really do. Like, I've never felt like such a punching bag by a utility in anywhere I've lived. Poof, 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 And you know what? I'll say one thing. There is a couple of municipal electricities in California, and one of them is in Sacramento, and they pay half of what we pay. And you know who lives in Sacramento? Politicians.
The governor.
Yeah, politicians. Yeah. So that tells you a lot right there.
Devin?
Okay, there's a couple more participant questions. I wanted to ask a quick question. Well, maybe this isn't exactly the right time. It's a little off topic from what we're just talking about, but you mentioned the PFAs and the freshwater fish. Do you have any idea of the bioaccumulation in the sea, and like the sea fish, the sea salt, all that? My sort of understanding is that the microplastics, all the toxins sort of accumulate around those microplastics. And I don't know if that means the PFAs would do that also. But again, any info?
Yeah, I'm less sure, but I am sure that they're accumulating, and the bioaccumulation is pretty severe. There's a lot of runoff into the ocean constantly of water with all the pollutants that happen. And I have some colleagues, Pendergast actually, I think is going to speak or has already spoken.
Next month.
Next month, yeah. This is a great question for that person. And because I know a graduate student who works with Pendergast, and they're studying an amazing amount of microplastics that are aerosolized from waves. So it's really, the whole planet is just saturated in plastic. You know, remember, you probably, a lot of you could remember that movie where they're like, you know what the future is? Plastics. Do you remember that one? What was that movie?
It was The Graduate.
The Graduate. Remember, he's like, the future is plastics. He wasn't wrong. You know, he was just, you know, he didn't, I don't think he thought, yeah, everybody's going to have plastic saturating their bodies all the time in every cell. And, you know, we're going to have and it's not just us, it's all the animals, you know, it's the soils, it's the bacteria, and nothing eats that stuff. I'm a microbiologist. I'm going to tell you, microbes eat everything. You could find a microbe to eat anything, including uranium, right? They will do things to uranium that are amazing, but only one of them maybe eats this stuff. It's remarkable. We've made a compound that is just so non-natural that nothing will touch it. Crazy.
Well, I'd like to go off in a tangential direction a little bit and get your thoughts. San Diego County has been working on a regional decarbonization framework, and many of us on the call have participated or are participating in that effort. And as part of their effort, they released a no-bid contract to UCSD.
Wow.
To do the technical analysis behind laying out solar and potentially wind and so forth in the county, and possibly extending over to Imperial County for the benefit of San Diego County. That contract went to David Victor, who's, I've attended a number of his lectures and I respect him immensely. I think he's a fantastic researcher and so forth. And they came back with some scenarios which basically boil down to, let's build utility scale solar on relatively precious land in, you know, our county and Imperial County, more or less, which would benefit SDG&E, of course. An organization called Save Our right?
Yeah, Bill Powers and Save Our Communities.
Yeah, Protect Our Communities Foundation, Bill Powers and so forth, has just sued the county and UCSD on the grounds that they issued a no-bid contract on the grounds that there was nobody else able to do this work. Well, obviously, lots of companies or people are able to do the analysis behind laying out solar and wind. I mean, you know, Mark Jacobson, among many, Bill Powers' company probably also, but numerous. And they not only laid out this approach, but it's clearly not the optimum approach. I mean, you know, it seems to me that rooftop solar combined with wind is, you know, ocean wind is probably the optimum path in terms of not needing as many batteries, because the wind and sun operate at different times during the day, and there's would reduce the cost. So there's lots of reason to think that we don't have the optimum recommendation. So, you know, here we are wanting to plunge ahead rapidly with solar and or wind and decarbonization, and Sempra issuing, Sempra paid the UCSD folks $1.5 million, this no bid contract, to get what looks like a biased solution. I mean, I've read the lawsuit written by Save Our Protect Our Communities Foundation, but there's not yet a response, I don't think, from the parties being sued. But in any event, it seems to me it's going to create a tangled mess. Resultant delays, and we're not going to get as timely a solution as we deserve and need for our climate situation, and to address this methane problem. Obviously, if we could have a saturation of rooftop solar and wind, we could get rid of a lot of this methane. What are your thoughts about this situation?
So it is a little, so this person works for the GPS, which is the Global Policy Solutions Institute.
I think so.
Yeah, and they have I know people who go there and they have a certain philosophy of how they do things. And I think it's really important. I don't know the whole story and I don't want to say anything because I think there's some litigious people out there. But there have been issues about things, and this is not just on UCSG campus, but we have to ask questions about where are they getting their funding, because that could really help determine where the solutions come from. And so that is something you cannot, there's a huge amount of fossil fuel funding that's absolutely goes to SIO, which is really kind of crazy because SIO also had the Keeling curve, so they've got this oil and gas money coming in. There's a lot of money flowing into universities and think tanks. And I'm not saying that GPS is part of that, but I think it's worth thinking about, let's put it that way. And I think that lawsuit's part of that. And I have heard David Victor speak about it, and I'm not going to say he's not smart. He comes across as very intelligent. He talks all the time. He flies to Davos, but he did do a couple of things. I believe he was actually was against the children who were suing to stop climate change recently. So he actually was on the other side, which it doesn't give me a great feeling, frankly. And then the other thing, the general solution, and this is where you have to be very careful as environmentalists and renewable energy, is we can't just have renewables. We have to have them, but we have to stop the other stuff. So what their solutions tend to be, there's a growth-minded solution, which is we're going to do it all. So we're going to have gas, and we're going to have solar and a wind, and we're going to have gas. And that's not compatible. You literally have to get rid of the gas, keep the oil and stuff in the ground, stop the gas leaks. All this other stuff are false solutions. He's also talked on the radio about carbon capture. Carbon capture has never worked. It will never work. It's impossible for it to work. So the idea that, and I can show you a million videos about this, but the idea, it's just physically impossible to make that work because it's so dilute in the atmosphere that capturing it takes more energy, where you have to use a ton of energy just to get it out of the atmosphere. You can only capture a fraction of it, and then what do you do with it? It's nuts. What you need to do is not have it in the first place. Oh, and then the hydrogen economy. Talk about stupid. Sorry, I'm going to just say it. Hydrogen is the only reason you would ever use hydrogen is if you couldn't do it with electricity. Absolutely no way. Because the problem with even green hydrogen is where you strip the hydrogen off of water using like wind, right? Well, the second law of thermodynamics says that every time you transfer from one energy source to another, you lose about 30% of it in heat. So it's stupid to use electricity to strip off hydrogen when you should just use the electricity because you're losing 30% of the energy. So all of these solutions, you know what they sound like to me? They sound like solutions written by people who want to sell you frack gas. Because where else do you get hydrogen? From fracking. You get it from stripping it off the methane, and that takes energy. So most of the hydrogen gas actually comes from gray, or what is it, blue or gray hydrogen, which
methane.
Methane, sorry.
Like 96 or 98% of it.
Exactly. And so the whole thing is crazy. So if you come up with solutions like that, you got to really think hard about what the goal is of these other solutions and where they're coming from. Because, you should just really you have rooftops everywhere. You have parking lots everywhere that are doing nothing but generating heat. They're totally useless. Why don't you just cover all the parking lots? You'd be fine.
Well, I'm certainly in your camp. Devin?
Okay, this is a couple of questions. I'm not sure exactly how to phrase this, but This is coming from Michael. So he's asking, can North County potentially find itself investing in a community choice energy grid or / microgrid? Wouldn't this help us get energy independent from SDG&E while also shifting to cleaner energy providers? And he has a follow-up. Is it possible to petition for community choice? And then I looked it up, community choice aggregation, or also known as community choice energy. Is it possible to petition for them to become, as a county, to be counted as a county? Any information or any thoughts there?
So that sounds like almost a legal issue. My understanding about CCA, I mean, there's some great parts of it, I think. It sounds good in theory. I think, though, they have to go through SDG&E because of the franchise agreement. I'm not sure of this. Other people on the call know more than I do. But essentially, you're still paying SDG&E for that. And so you're really not separated from that. Is there a way to separate the two? I think that's an excellent question. That's kind of a legal question that I don't know the answer to, like where you can have a real competitor, a true competitor, where they not have. But the problem is, I think a lot of the infrastructure is owned by SDG&E. And so I'm not sure how easy that could be. So, but I'd love it if it were true. And I think that's why a lot of us are saying, well, public power would allow that to be true. More or less. So that's, because we'd have a democratic control of that.
There are some CCAs in the Bay Area that have funded microgrids to be full competitors to, I guess, in their case, PG&E or,
SDG&E has microgrids. Did you know that? It has it around the county?
They've got several in the county. Yeah.
Why don't they put those on the parking lots and then instead of having peaker plants, they could have battery storage. You know why this would be so great, by the way? This is more than just a renewable energy issue. If you look at what happened I'm going to give Puerto Rico as an example. Do people know that story where there was a big hurricane, knocked down all the trees, people died, like thousands or tens of thousands of people who died because there was all the lines were knocked down. There was no way to get the trucks in for fuel. They ran out of electricity in the hospitals. So what happened was, after that, some people said, hey, let's get away from these providers and just put a couple solar panels up on the roof. So they started putting them around. They were fought by the big utility, by the way, because face it, Puerto Rico is a colony of the United States and they do what we tell them to do, right? So they fought them, but some people still got them up there. Well, guess what happened next? The next thing that happened was an earthquake. And so the earthquake knocked down the power, except for the people who had solar panels. The reason why I'm saying this, and they were able to keep their oxygen on, they kept their food cold. This is a climate emergency idea. We need independent solar all through our county and battery storage in case of fires, in case of earthquakes, in case of heat, spiking of heat or whatever comes with climate change. We need this as a way to secure an emergency future that we know we're already hitting. So
anybody who would like to dig into that a little more, go to our YouTube channel. Justin Locke from RMI did a presentation. RMI on this topic. RMI installed some of the microgrids in Puerto Rico and Africa and Asia, and Justin leads the team that does those implementations in various places around the world. You're 100% right in that. And by the way, just to add, Santa Barbara has put microgrids on every one of their schools and uses them as resilience centers. In case of fire or mudslide or whatever, the school microgrid keeps running, right? And it keeps medicine cold and does all the things that the community needs. There's no reason for us not to do that. And also to add to it, EV buses with the battery energy from the buses serving the schools in emergency cases also, and being charged, the batteries being charged later at night when they're no longer needed in the typical case. And this would again improve the health of our children immensely, with getting rid of emissions. So yes. One of the things I've noticed in the news lately is a number of our friends in the Republican Party making a fuss about, you're going to take away my gas stove.
Mhm.
Right? And, you know, we can't let you do that. I mean, I'll never give up my gas, right? All that stuff. Any thoughts about how we can combat that nonsense?
Yeah, so first, before I go to that, I'd like to talk about the schools a bit, just a couple of little factoids. There are schools that have put up solar in other parts of the country, and they reduced their electricity bills so much that they were able to keep the teachers. So there was and then I've always wondered, like, wouldn't it be nice to combine it with rainwater collecting? So if you covered parking lots, if you covered places, you could actually collect the rainwater and use it locally for the plants and everything. And I'll be honest, like, if you parked under some solar panels in a parking lot, that's where you really want to park, because it's nice and cool. You know, the heat of the, you know, they're the best places to put your car to. So, but to go to your gas stove question, yeah, it became a cultural touchstone, like seat belts or something, right? But you know, and I had a whole slide about what it's like to live in, you know, to have gas stoves. So the people who are saying, I want my gas stove, well, they probably have a nice modern gas stove and a big range with a huge like fan to pull away all the noxious gases. But if you live in a small apartment with a crappy gas stove and you don't have good ventilation, then you're going to be breathing in. They found out that there's a lot of stoves leak constantly, not just when they're on, they're always leaking a little bit of nitrogen oxides and ozone. And that is going to cause you to, you know, if you have any asthmatic problems or you have kids, they'll develop asthma. We're talking about a real issue with apartments and low income. And, you know, and then of course got the gas bill, which goes up and down like a yo-yo whenever SDG&E feels like they need to get a couple of bucks back. So it's you know, this gas stove is a real thing. In fact, if you watch that video, it was interesting. If you watch the video of the methane thing that I put in the link, one of the speakers talks about they were trying to figure out where some of the methane sources are. They had the methane gas from the pipes and the leaks. They had methane from landfills and cows, but then there was like a lot of methane that was seasonal and had something to do with LA. They were took in LA County. And what they think is happening is it's the leaking stoves and the leaking gas equipment, which is in cities was a huge signal of methane leaking in Southern California. So it is a serious issue, not only just for health, but also for climate change. Because there's all, and you can imagine like one stove leaking isn't much gas, but if you multiply that by 900,000 stoves, now you're talking some gas.
That's what we have in our county.
Yeah, and that's, you know, this is where, like, you know, with a scientist, I can see the numbers in my head. I'm like, I can see visually everyone's a little bit of leaking all over the county, just a little bit of gas, but like adding up to actually something significant. And that is something that, you know, they just don't want to talk about. I mean, SoCal Gas, did you know SoCal Gas got caught running fake ads, like telling people they would pay influencers to say how great their gas stove cooking was? And we're paying for that. We pay for those stupid ads. Yes. It's like you can't even get worse. Like, oh, you can get worse, but it's hard.
It's insane.
Well, you know, it depends on what your goal is. It's insane as a planet. It's insane for health. It's insane that we're paying for it in individuals and that we have to feel bad about it. But for their profits, they're making money, you know, and that's their only goal. Don't think anything else, by the way. If you ever hear what they say, they're saying, how am I going to make profit? Because that's all corporations want to do. That's their whole goal, is to give to their shareholders. And they make it explicit, absolutely explicit.
Devin?
Well, just to sort of continue on that, I remember watching Samantha Bee. She actually did a good piece on the stoves, the influencers, how they were paying influencers to go on Instagram and sort of say, oh, the food tastes so much better with the gas stove, you know, oh, don't take away. But we talked, or both of you talked a little bit about the cultural issue, how they're trying to make it so that it's like, oh, they're trying to take my stove away. So if it is that, if it's sort of a basic or base cultural how do you combat that? I mean, obviously education, but how do you sort of, if people are being manipulated in that way, so they're trying to take my stove away, what is the logical counter to that? Like, how do you counter a social issue like that?
Americans are, I mean, we have a culture. Our culture is very, like, the culture is like, we're independent. We get to make choices. If you go back to the 80s, people are like, I like to drink a beer in my car when I'm driving. Don't take that away from me. I don't want to wear a seatbelt. Well, the government's going to be kind. So we've got this strange, which is very strong in our country, and it get played out. And we have a whole, media ecosystem and one channel essentially that is devoted to that. So it's really hard to get through that. And you can see this with vaccines. You can see this with masks. If you really push people and you say, this is a mandate that you have to do this, which is what happened with the gas stoves, you have to ask yourself, how important is that? And is there another way to go around it? And I don't have an answer for it, but what you could say is, hey, we got this other technology, which is really awesome, which is called induction cooking. How do I not know this? I thought it was brilliant. It was incredible how fast things heated up. It's safer for older people. It's safer for, like, you don't get your house down. And when I first used an induction cooking stove, I was absolutely stunned at it. So maybe we can say, look, you got this gas stove is leaking in your house, and here's an alternative, which is really, really great. And just go another way, instead of pushing people, like, you've got to get rid of these stoves and passing a law. I don't have a solution, but you have to think about what's the scale of the issue, right? And is this worth pushing on this particular button to get a response, or is there a better way that we could say, hey, we're gonna treat you like an adult. We're going to give you some information. We're going to get the best that we have, and let you make a decision. And let people decide whether they want to do it or not, and then give incentives. Do an incentive instead of a punishment. I don't know. I have no solution for this.
Well,
maybe that would work better with Americans. I don't know.
The IRA has financial incentives for induction cooktop stoves and heat pumps, which would replace the methane heating and cool, and all that silliness too. So we actually have it. We got to tell the story. We've got to get out and make sure people understand that there are these financial incentives to get better solutions. I mean, why not?
So I'd like to interject here a little bit, if I may, because we're kind of coming up to 7 o'clock. And I want to make sure that everybody who has attended this talk tonight has had a chance, if they had a question, to get it answered. And Devin, you've been doing a great job with it, but is there anybody who's still that of that has a question that they want answered? If you could take a quick look for us. And while he's doing that, I would like to add on about the induction cooktops, and that there is an induction cooktop loaner program here in San Diego, and it's a great opportunity for people who don't yet have any knowledge about it to have a chance to take one of those cooktops and use them for 3 weeks in their homes. And I put the link in the chat. Also too, Scott, I would like to recommend that you publicize, or your group publicizes, the event on April 1st a little bit more, because I went looking for a link to add to the chat, and it's not on the 350 calendar event or anything like that. And I saw it on Facebook, so I'm already aware of it, but it might be good if you could get the word out a little bit more on that. And I'll certainly help from my end too. I'll help promote that event. And so Devin, while I was talking there, did you see any other questions?
So these aren't questions, just 2 quick comments from Elizabeth. Scott, Kelley, you rock. Your awesome presentation just blew me away. I will for sure have people check this out on YouTube that could not attend. Thank you so much. And then Kathy just wanted to make sure that we included in that not only is the methane or the nitrogen coming out of the gas stoves, but also benzene. And obviously we know benzene is not a good thing, but that's it.
Okay.
So a couple of things. So I put in the chat, and thank Jerry for reminding me, 350 doesn't have this on there, but publicpowersandiego.org has a petition and they have the information. And I just put that was put in the chat right now. Please take a look at it.
Okay,
And I
thank
did
you.
have this interesting thing from Court Cassidy about hydrogen gas. If hydrogen is made, there are certain, I want to be clear, there are certain things where electricity isn't going to work. But for everything that you can use electricity for, you should absolutely do it, even if you have the greenest of hydrogen. So I think we can all agree on that because of the way. The problem with using hydrogen generally, though, is there's two issues that need to be taken into account that transport of hydrogen is a small molecule and it's going to leak more easily than other molecules. And you say, well, hydrogen's an inert gas, but actually when it combines with methane in the atmosphere, it actually extends the life of methane in the atmosphere. So it's indirectly a global warming gas. And the problem is transporting hydrogen, because it's small, it will leak more readily. And you have to cool it, I believe, a lot colder than you do for methane to ship it. So the idea of shipping it across the ocean is really, really got to think about this very carefully. So you might have to use it, but you should be very careful about where you use it, how much you use it. And it should only be green and only when you absolutely can't do it with electricity, because it does have a indirect global warming effect. So anyway, I just wanted to touch on that because it's a
Thanks
good
so
question,
much.
but I think it's important to think about it.
As
Okay,
as a reminder, Scott is the co-leader of Raise the Alarm
Mhm.
team at SD 350. And if anybody listened to this tonight didn't get the alarm, there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Marion?
Well, again, thank you to our audience. We really appreciate all your thoughtful comments and questions, and also to you, Scott. It was a very informative and, like we said, alarming presentation, but one that we really needed to hear. And here at NCCA, we have a tradition of not rewarding, but honoring our speakers with a gift that we have gotten for you. And Meryl, so what we have done, Scott, is we bought a tree for you, and it's been planted here in a forest in California that has been burned by the wildfires. And so again, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who came tonight. And we will see you guys. Well, we'll see you April 1st. Okay. I want to be looking for y'all down there at the Civic Center, noon to 2, right? And then hopefully we will hopefully see you again next month too for our talk with about the Tijuana water situation. Okay. So thank you guys ever so much. Take care.